My name is Peter Mitchell. I'm the tutor in archaeology at St Hugh's College, which is one of the colleges that admit people to read archaeology and anthropology at Oxford. And I'd like to spend the next few minutes explaining a little bit about what the subject is, how we teach it here, and at the end, how you can apply for it. So, what is Arch and Anth? In some ways, it's the most ambitious subject that you could possibly imagine studying. It covers the entirety of human experience from the very beginning of the human fossil lineage some 7 million years ago when our ancestors diverged from those of chimpanzees, right up to the present. And it covers everything both in time and also in space. So when we're looking at it and when we're teaching it here in Oxford, we're looking at the whole breadth and depth of human experience. So some of the questions that we might want to look at include these. Why do we move around normally on two legs, whereas our closest relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, generally walk around on their knuckles? What is the reason for that in terms of human evolution? When and where and under what kinds of circumstances did all the other key events in human evolution take place? For example, the innovation of stone tools, the invention of fire, the controlled use of it to make artifacts, to keep people warm, to cook food. When did people start to hunt meat on a regular basis? And what difference may that have made to their biological evolution and also to their cultural evolution? When and how did people, or the ancestors of modern people, populate the rest of the planet? We know that hominins, that's to say human ancestors, first evolved in Africa and that they spread from there across the rest of the world. We know from the fossil evidence that there were at various times other hominin species existing in other parts of the world, such as the Neanderthals here in Europe and in Western Asia. What kinds of relationships were there between those different species? What kinds of relationships were there between Neanderthals and the even more mysterious Denisovans of Siberia and modern humans as they moved across the planet in the way you can see up there on that map? And as people expanded into new environments, whether towards the end of the Ice Age or very, very recently in settling oceanic islands, what impact did they have on the planet's ecology? What transformations did they create on the plants and animals that they encountered? How and for how long have people been shaping the environments in which they live? Another of the big questions of archaeology and anthropology concerns speech and language. When did human speech as we know it today first emerge? How can we recognize its appearance in the archaeological record? When we find engraved pieces of ochre like this on the top here, or the shell beads that you can see on the right, both of them from the site of Blombos Cave in South Africa, and both of them around about 75,000 years old. Do the manufacture of these items and similar things mean that for the first time we can be sure that the people who made these would have been able to have the kind of conversations that we have today? How else can we explain the presence of art and of items that must have been used, can only have had a function as pieces of decoration, pieces of jewelry? How does language affect and structure the way in which we view the world? This is a big question in anthropology, but if we think about the effect that writing has, then it also relates back again to the archaeological record. Now, I don't know what you may have had for breakfast today, but the chances are that whatever you will be eating probably was produced on some kind of farm. So how is it that if we were to go back in time 15,000 years or so, everyone on Earth hunted and gathered for their food, with dogs the only, and at that point still, very recent domestic animal? This hunting and gathering way of life is something that is now found only to a very limited degree and only in a very, very few places in the world, whether in the high Arctic or perhaps in places like the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa. And yet today, virtually everybody on the planet depends on farming, as I said, but specifically on the farming of just a very few species of cereals like rice, tubers like potatoes, or animals like cattle. How and why did that happen? How and why did those very few resources spread around the planet? And that's only one of the major changes that have happened in the last 10 to 15,000 years. One of the others is an enormous shift in the ways in which human societies organize themselves. Going from a situation in which people lived in relatively small, mostly egalitarian, pretty mobile societies, to ones that are massively larger, hierarchically organized, typically fixed in place, with huge monuments like the temples of Abu Simbel in Egypt or the pyramids of Teotihuacan in Mexico, or what you see now in a major modern metropolis, somewhere like, let's say, Tokyo or New York. How are such widely different societies organized and structured, and how have these changes happened? Again, these are questions that go to the heart of both anthropology and archaeology. But we're also interested in asking how different societies at different times in different places respond to and make sense of the same kinds of human experiences. Wherever you go in the world, people are born, they grow up, they learn, they get married, they have children, and eventually they die. How do societies make sense of this? How do they organize themselves to make sense of it? And how do they organize themselves to deal with things that are unexpected and perhaps inexplicable? So along with thinking about these commonalities of experience, we're also thinking here about the ways in which people make sense of their world, the ways in which they relate to the supernatural, whether through church services, trance dances, or beliefs about witchcraft, oracles, and magic. And if you think about your own lives for a moment, it's obvious that none of us live in a world free from material things. We have objects all around us. Our lives are structured by those objects, whether they are small items of personal jewelry or clothing, or whether they're very large items like the spatial organization of a house. How then do people use material objects to relate to each other and to relate themselves to the world about them? What do they think those objects are? How do they make them? How do they make ostrich eggshell beads in southern Africa or pottery in India? And having made them, do they then worship them like the ancient Egyptians worship the Sphinx? Or do they treat them as tourist objects, as we might today? How do these things change through time? What kind of biographies do the material items that we make and create and live with have? What stories do they tell? So to sum this up, archaeology is investigating all of these questions by looking at how human societies have changed over time, mostly through the material remains, the artifacts, the plant and animal remains from people's meals that past societies have left behind. Archaeology, on the other hand, is investigating human societies in the present and the very recent past through material objects, but typically by living with communities, by participating in their activities, by recording what people do over long periods of time. Now, we think that it's important to study both of these subjects together. We think they have a great deal to say to each other. We think that we have a great deal to learn by teaching them as one. And so here at Oxford, you would study archaeology and anthropology together as complementary ways of understanding human diversity, both in the present and in the past. And you would continue to do that throughout the 3 years of the degree. But within that, the degree is structured so as to give you a great deal of choice in what you would like to emphasize. And in terms of the way in which we're teaching, we're using lectures, but also tutorials, which is to say the discussion of a particular topic between you and perhaps one other student at a time and a tutor, seminars and practical classes working with objects, practical classes in archaeological science, and also fieldwork of various kinds. So let's now have a look and see a little bit more about how the degree is structured. We assume that when people come up to Oxford, they know relatively little about either archaeology or anthropology. So the first year consists of 4 papers which aim to introduce you to both of these fields. We have one which looks at the big questions that I talked about a moment ago, about things like the origins of food production and the origins of states and cities, called Introduction to World Archaeology. Introduction to Anthropological Theory does exactly that, looking at the history of anthropology, but also at major themes like the anthropology of politics, law, kinship, marriage, religion. Perspectives on Human Evolution combines fossil evidence, the insights increasingly coming now from genetics, from primate studies, and from archaeology to understand how humans have evolved from that point of divergence with chimpanzees up to the present. And finally, the nature of archaeological and anthropological inquiry focuses more upon theory and methods, and also the cultural and political context within which archaeology and anthropology are practiced today and have been practiced in the past. And each of those papers is taught through a combination of lectures. Normally you would have one, maybe 2 lectures a week in the first 2 terms, and tutorials. And as I said, those are opportunities for you to write an essay and then come and discuss it with a tutor. And you'd normally have 12 of those tutorials in your first 2 terms, and then the final 8 in the last term after Easter. So each paper has 8 tutorials to go with its lectures. And we have practical classes which support paper 4, the nature of archaeological and anthropological inquiry, as well as paper 4 of finals, which I'll mention in a moment. And at the end of your first year, you get assessed currently by 3-hour written exam papers, 1 for each of those papers, for each of which you're required to write 3 essays. One of the features of the Oxford degree, I should add, is that currently there are no university exams for it. And having done your exams at the end of year 1, you then have to undertake at least 4 weeks of approved fieldwork. Now, most people end up doing an archaeological dig, but it's equally possible to do an anthropological research project, to intern in a museum, or to undertake some kind of lab-based research. And you're required to write up a report on this at the end of the summer and present it later on during your second year. And we have university funds, but also you'll find that your college is likely to have funds that can help you meet the costs of whatever kind of fieldwork you choose to do. You come back to Oxford at the beginning of your second year and you embark on what we call the final honours school. Now, this is the second and third years of the degree, and it consists of 4 core papers which continue to explore the relationships between archaeology and anthropology in societies both past and present. As well as that, you choose 3 options from a very wide range of both archaeological and anthropological topics. And finally, you also embark on a dissertation, an independent piece of work chosen in consultation with tutors. And you can see here how each of these individual components makes up the total mark for your final degree. So the core papers that we have are these. The lectures in them run every year, but you would normally be expected to turn up for them in your second year, catching up on anything that you might have missed in your third year. Each of these papers has 8 tutorials associated with it, and you do almost all of those tutorials during year 2. You would only have half of one paper of tutorials left to do in Michaelmas, that is to say the first term of the third year. So the core part of the degree is essentially something that you take in your second. You then have 3 option papers. Normally you take one of these in the second term of your second year. The other 2 options you would take in the first and second terms, Michaelmas and Hilary, of your last year. And you can put them together in any way you like, by period, by region, by topic. And the list up here is just a very small selection of the options that currently exist. And this is something that we're adding to and changing all the time, really, depending upon staff availability and interest. So one of the questions that people ask, maybe your parents or your friends or your school would ask is, so what's the point? What are you going to be able to do with this degree? Is it really worth it? Shouldn't you be better off doing something more sensible? Well, you can do virtually anything with Arch and Anth. And we've had people, of course, go into graduate studies. Some of them are now teaching at major universities in this country, elsewhere in Europe, or in the Americas. We've had people go on and become lawyers, successful broadcasters, filmmakers, journalists. We've had many people go into teaching, financial services, people entering the Foreign Office, the Army, one at least who went on to graduate entry medicine, people who've sold wine, made adverts, and for a time at least also worked in a rock band. As to how you apply, this is very straightforward. This is a common process for all Oxford degrees. We have the closing date for UCAS at October the 15th. You need to send in your application form by that date. You need to also send us 2 essays plus a short answer to a question that we will set. They need to come into us by the middle of November. And on the basis of all the information on your UCAS form, your grades, your personal statement, your academic reference, as well as the written work you've sent in, we'll then decide who it is we wish to interview, and we will interview you over the course of a couple of days in December. People who have interviews at Oxford often think before they get here that there's something peculiar about them, that they are designed to catch you out. They're not. They're designed to see how you can think on your feet, how you can respond to novel situations that you may not previously have come across, how you can be challenged when presenting arguments. And we'll use a whole range of things, objects, maps, photographs, to try and structure those discussions and to try to get your response to them. And I would say now, if you get asked a question and you don't know the answer, you must say so. And then it's our problem. We have to move on to the next question. If you don't hear or properly understand the question, ask for it to be repeated. There's no problem about doing that at all. We admit about 25 or so people every year. And if you're doing A-levels, then the offer that we would make is AAA. If you're doing the International Baccalaureate, the offer is 38 points, and you would need to get at least 6 in your high-level subjects. For other kinds of qualifications, you can either check the university's main website, or you can ask directly. You can email me, or you can email undergraduate support at arc.ox.ac.uk. And I leave you with just one thought. There are a number of things you can do as a result of having taken the trouble to look at this open day presentation today. You could decide Oxford isn't the place for you, and that's fine. You could decide that it really is, and you would love to come here, and you apply, and you'll get in, and you will come to one of the best universities in the world with the best rating for teaching both archaeology and anthropology anywhere at all, and you'll have a great time, and it will change your life. You could, of course, apply and not get in, and you will feel sad about that. But if that's the case, you'll still pick yourself up and go off and have a great time somewhere else. What you don't want to do is not apply at all, and then wake up, let's say when you're 40 or 50, and ask yourself, well, I wonder what it would have been like if I had applied. Apply, take the chance. We look forward to seeing you here when things are back to normal, and we look forward to you getting in touch with us if you have any questions. Thank you very much indeed.